Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a legendary love story wrapped in a life of crime, Bonnie and Clyde.
Right.
Their ride or die reputation is part of what makes their story so, well, compelling.
Absolutely.
But we're going to take that legendary loyalty and throw it into the ultimate test, the prisoner's dilemma.
Exactly. The prisoner's dilemma is uh, such a fascinating scenario. At its core, it really boils down to this tension between what's best for you, like as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
and what's best for the group you're a part of. And often those two things are in direct conflict.
And Bonnie and Clyde, well, as the story goes, they were the ultimate we against the world, right?
But legend.
Their devotion to each other is, a cornerstone of their enduring image. So the question we're digging into is whether that intense personal bond could truly withstand the pressures of a situation specifically designed to, well, incentivize betrayal.
That's precisely what we're going to explore. We'll be using game theory as our lens, analyzing potential situations they might have actually encountered. And this isn't just theoretical. We'll be looking at the potential outcomes, the best and worst scenarios laid out numerically, to really understand the strategic choices they faced.
So our goal today is to understand the dynamics of trust, betrayal, and the possibility of mutual benefit when the stakes are sky high.
Yeah.
Whether you're dealing with complex negotiations or simply trying to understand the intricacies of human relationships, the principles we uncover here are, well, surprisingly universal.
They really are.
Okay, let's unpack this by diving into our first scenario, the classic interrogation room.
Right. This is the scenario that really defines the prisoner's dilemma. Imagine Bonnie and Clyde have been arrested for armed robbery.
Yeah.
They're separated, no way to communicate, and the police offer each of them the exact same deal. Cooperate, testify against the other, and you might walk free or get a, significantly reduced sentence.
So for each of them, the choice boils down to staying silent, essentially sticking by their partner, remaining loyal.
Right, cooperating with each other.
Right. Or confessing and implicating the other, which is the act of betrayal, of looking out for number one.
Precisely. Defecting. And the way the consequences of those choices are structured is what creates the dilemma. We can visualize these potential outcomes using what's called a payoff matrix.
Okay.
Way to systematically see what happens based on the different choices they might make. In this case, the payoff is the amount of prison time they might face, and naturally, less is better.
Right. So if Bonnie and Clyde both stick together and refuse to talk, the prosecution's case is weaker. Let's say they each face a relatively short sentence, maybe just 1 year each.
That's the cooperative outcome. Now here's where the dynamic shifts dramatically. Imagine Bonnie remains silent, trusting Clyde.
Okay.
But Clyde, thinking only of himself, confesses and implicates Bonnie. Clyde walks free 0 years.
Wow.
But Bonnie, left high and dry, might face the maximum penalty, say, 20 years. That's the really painful outcome the suckers pay off for being loyal when the other person isn't.
Ouch. Yeah, that's brutal. And of course, the same could happen to Clyde if Bonnie were the one to confess and he remained silent.
Exactly the same. She walks free, Najo years, and he's looking at 20 years behind bars.
Right.
And finally, consider if both Bonnie and Clyde, driven by that fear of being the sucker, decide to confess and betray each other.
Okay, what happens then?
Well, their testimonies help secure convictions, but because they've both cooperated with the police to some extent, maybe their sentences are somewhat reduced, let's say 5 years each.
Okay, so let's think about this from Bonnie's perspective alone first. What's the most logical, self-serving move for her to make, regardless of what Clyde does?
Let's break it down. If Clyde stays silent, Bonnie gets 1 year if she also stays silent, but no years if she confesses.
Then Roe is better.
2 is better. Now, if Clyde confesses, Bonnie faces 20 years if she stays silent, but only 5 years if she also confesses.
5 is definitely better than 20.
Absolutely. So you see, no matter what Clyde chooses to do, Bonnie's individual outcome is always better if she confesses. That makes confessing her dominant strategy.
And the exact same logic applies to Clyde. Right. He's looking at the same potential outcomes and facing the same incentives.
Absolutely. For Clyde, confessing is also the dominant strategy. So if both Bonnie and Clyde are acting purely in their own self-interest,
which rationality suggests they might,
the game theory prediction is that they will both end up confessing.
which results in both of them serving 5 years. But wait a minute. If they had both just kept their mouths shut, they would have only served 1 year each. That outcome seems significantly worse for both of them. It almost feels counterintuitive.
That is the very heart of the prisoner's dilemma. From their joint perspective, the best outcome is for both to stay silent, minimizing their total time in prison to just 2 years combined.
Right.
But to get there, they would need complete trust in each other, some kind of unbreakable agreement or, a way to guarantee the other person's cooperation.
Which they don't have in separate rooms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the harsh reality of an interrogation room, under pressure, and with no way to know what the other is doing, that level of trust is incredibly difficult to maintain. It highlights how our inherent aversion to being taken advantage of
That sucker's payoff.
can override the logic of mutual benefit.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests a deep-seated psychological drive to protect ourselves, even if it means a lesser outcome for everyone involved.
It's that fear of being the only one left holding the bag. That fear of that 20-year sentence that really drives the temptation to betray, even if it leads to a worse overall situation.
Yeah.
It definitely brings that cynical saying to mind. There is no honor among thieves.
And what's fascinating when you look at the numbers, we might loosely call numerical optimization here,
Okay.
is how stark the difference is. If they cooperate, stay silent, the total years are 2. If they both betray, it jumps to 10.
Wow, big jump.
And that one-sided betrayal results in a staggering 20 total years, all on the loyal partner. By putting numbers on these potential outcomes, those years in prison, we can clearly see how the self-interested calculation leads to a different result than what's best for them together.
So game theory formally identifies this as a prisoner's dilemma. And as we've seen, the most rational choice for each individual looking out only for themselves is to defect, to confess.
Yes. And the outcome where both confess, 5 years, is what we call the Nash equilibrium.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It's a stable state where neither player has any incentive to unilaterally change their strategy, given what the other player is doing, even though they'd both be better off if they had both stayed silent.
Right.
Once they've both confessed, neither can improve their own situation by suddenly deciding to recant or change their mind.
Yeah.
If Bonnie switches back to silent while Clyde is confessing, she gets 20 years instead of 5. No good.
Got it. So in this classic interrogation scenario, game theory predicts mutual betrayal. It's a pretty stark contrast to the romanticized idea of Bonnie and Clyde's unwavering devotion.
It really is.
Okay, let's move on to a different kind of pressure, one that's perhaps a bit more about internal conflict. The division of the spoils from a heist. Scenario 2. The heist double cross.
Yeah, this shifts the dynamic from the immediate threat of law enforcement to the lure of personal gain. Imagine Bonnie and Clyde have just pulled off a big robbery.
Okay.
They're hiding out with a pile of loot, and they've initially agreed to a simple 50-50 split. But now, in the quiet of their hideaway, each one starts to think, maybe I could just take all of it.
Right, this isn't under the intense pressure of the police. This is at their moment of triumph, supposedly. But the choice is still there. Cooperate, stick to the agreement.
Or defect. Try to grab the whole pot.
Okay.
Let's say the total value of the stolen goods is 10 units. If they both cooperate and divide it as planned, they each end up with 5 units.
Seems reasonable. Fair split.
Yeah.
But what if Bonnie gets greedy and decides to try and sneak off with all 10 units while Clyde is still expecting a fair split?
In that situation, if Bonnie is successful, she gets all 10 units and Clyde gets nothing.
Yeah.
0. Conversely, if Clyde tries to double-cross Bonnie while she's planning to stick to the deal, he walks away with all 10 and she gets 0.
Oh, okay, same logic. And what happens if both of them try to betray each other at the same time? It sounds like it could get messy.
It certainly could.
Yeah.
There might be a confrontation. They might alert others. They might just end up in a chaotic scramble. The likely outcome is that neither manages to secure the entire amount. Let's say in the ensuing struggle, they each manage to grab maybe a meager 1 unit before things fall apart.
Only 1 unit each. Okay, so let's run through the individual incentives again, like before. If Clyde intends to stick to the split, cooperate, Bonnie's choice is between getting 5 units by also cooperating or getting 10 units by trying to take it all. 10 is clearly better.
Clearly.
Now, if Clyde intends to betray her and steal everything, Bonnie's choice is between getting 0 units by still trying to split or maybe grabbing that 1 unit in the chaos of a double cross.
1 is better than 0. So you see the same pattern emerge. For Bonnie, the strategy of trying to steal all the loot is the dominant strategy. It's better regardless what Clyde does.
And the exact same logic applies to Clyde. He's always better off trying to take everything, regardless of what Bonnie intends to do.
Precisely.
So if they both act on this self-interested logic, they both try to double-cross each other, and they both end up with only 1 unit of loot.
Hmm.
But if they had simply trusted each other and stuck to the 50-50 split, they would have each had 5 units. That's a 5-fold difference.
Huge difference.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it, that trying to grab more can actually leave you with less.
Exactly. Mutual benefit here arises from trust and cooperation. Splitting yields a significantly better individual and total profit, 10 units total, compared to the measly 2 units they get from mutual betrayal.
Right.
But the lack of absolute certainty about the other's intentions and the tempting nature of a large immediate gain, it fuels the incentive to betray.
So, even without the external pressure of the law, this scenario becomes a prisoner's dilemma driven by greed and the fear of being exploited.
Pretty much, yeah.
Double-crossing is the dominant strategy, leading to that suboptimal outcome where they both end up with far less than they could have had.
Precisely. The fundamental tension of the prisoner's dilemma is laid bare again. Individually, it seems best to defect to try and take it all. But if both parties follow that logic, the outcome is worse for everyone involved than if they had both chosen to cooperate. The outcome where both try to steal all and end up with 1 unit each is the Nash equilibrium in this scenario.
Same concept as before.
Yep. Neither can unilaterally improve their outcome given the other's choice. If Bonnie tries to switch back to split while Clyde is stealing, she gets 0 instead of 1.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that if this were a repeated interaction, like a long-term partnership, things might play out differently.
Yes, potentially. In a continuing relationship, whether criminal or otherwise, betraying a partner can have significant long-term consequences.
Like reputation.
Damage to reputation, loss of future opportunities, maybe even retaliation. The possibility of future cooperation and the benefits it might bring can incentivize individuals to act more cooperatively in the present.
Makes sense.
But in a one-off situation like this hypothetical heist division, that immediate temptation can be very strong. It really underscores how fragile any alliance based purely on self-interest can be.
Okay, for our final scenario, we're moving into much more personal and emotional territory. Scenario 3, love versus freedom, the loyalty dilemma.
This scenario really gets to the core of Bonnie and Clyde's legendary bond, exploring the strength of their emotional connection and trust. Imagine they're captured once again.
Okay.
But this time, the investigators try a different approach. They offer each of them a separate deal, specifically appealing to their desire to be free. The crucial element here is that if neither of them agrees to betray the other, the evidence against them is weak, and they might both walk free or face, minimal consequences.
So the fundamental choice remains. Stay loyal to your lover, potentially facing legal repercussions together, or betray them for the chance to gain your own freedom.
Right.
But this time, the stakes are much higher. Emotionally, betrayal could mean the end of their relationship.
Exactly. Let's consider the potential outcomes in this context. If both Bonnie and Clyde choose to remain loyal, neither provides incriminating information.
Okay.
With a weak case, they might both go free, or at least face very minor charges. Their trust in each other and their bond remain intact, perhaps even strengthened. Best case, emotionally.
That sounds like the ideal outcome for them.
Right.
Now, what happens if Bonnie stays true to their bond and refuses the deal, but Clyde decides to betray her and take the opportunity for freedom?
Well, Clyde might secure a significantly reduced sentence, let's say 2 years, maybe even less depending on the deal.
Okay.
But Bonnie, left to face the full force of the law on her own, could be looking at a substantial prison sentence, let's call it 15 years. And beyond the legal consequences, their relationship would almost certainly be irreparable, shattered by Clyde's betrayal of their love and trust.
The reverse situation would be equally devastating, wouldn't it? Bonnie betrays Clyde to gain her freedom.
She gets the light sentence, say 2 years.
And Clyde is left to face the legal system alone, gets 15 years, and their deep connection destroyed.
Exactly. And what if both of them, perhaps doubting the other's loyalty or succumbing to their own desire for freedom, decide to betray each other?
Okay, mutual betrayal again. What's the outcome?
They would both provide evidence against the other, likely ensuring convictions for both of them. While their individual sentences might not be as severe as if only one had been betrayed maybe 5 years each, like in the first scenario, they both end up in prison, and their relationship is almost certainly over, tainted by mutual betrayal.
So if we're looking at this purely through the lens of minimizing individual jail time, it sounds like the logic of betrayal still holds.
It does, purely legally. If your partner stays loyal, you gain a significant advantage, less jail time, by betraying them. 2 years versus maybe 0, if both loyal. but 0 is risky.
Right.
If your partner betrays you, you still likely achieve a better legal outcome by also betraying them. 5 years versus 15 years?
But this is where that deep emotional bond between Bonnie and Clyde is supposed to come into play. If they truly valued their love for each other above their own individual freedom, how might that shift their decision-making?
Yeah, this is the key difference. If their priority is the well-being of their partner and the continuation of their life together, the potential psychological cost of betrayal becomes immense.
Right.
Bonnie might reason, even if I gain my freedom, what is that freedom worth without Clyde by my side? If both of them feel this way, their personal payoffs change dramatically. Staying loyal, even if it means facing some prison time together. Maybe that hypothetical 0 years could be a far more desirable outcome for them than the solitary freedom gained through betrayal, 2 years but relationship destroyed, or the bitterness of mutual betrayal, 5 years each and relationship destroyed.
So the value of the relationship itself becomes a factor in the payoff.
Exactly. In a relationship built on deep trust and love, mutual sacrifice in this case, remaining loyal, can become the most rational choice when the value they place on that relationship outweighs their fear of imprisonment.
But that kind of decision hinges on absolute certainty about the other person's commitment, doesn't it? That underlying doubt, will they really make the same sacrifice for me, could still be a powerful force pushing someone towards self-preservation.
Precisely. The risk of misplaced trust is enormous in this scenario. If Bonnie deeply believes in their love and stays silent, but Clyde, motivated by his own fear or desire for freedom, betrays her.
She gets the worst outcome.
She suffers the worst possible outcome. A long prison sentence, 15 years, and the devastating loss of her love and trust. That inherent uncertainty can be a significant driver towards betrayal, even if it ultimately leads to a less desirable outcome if the partner was also planning to remain loyal.
You mentioned assigning a trust value earlier. How could we think about that influencing the choices here?
Well, imagine we assign a significant negative value, like a huge penalty, to the act of betraying someone you deeply love.
Okay.
A profound psychological cost that far outweighs the potential benefit of a slightly shorter prison sentence. If that cost is high enough for both Bonnie and Clyde, the entire calculation changes. You saying loyal, 0, 0, even if it carries the risk of being the sucker, 15 years, might actually yield a higher overall payoff for them.
Because they avoid that huge emotional cost of betrayal.
Exactly. They factor in the preservation of their relationship and the avoidance of immense guilt and heartbreak. It essentially flips the incentive structure of the dilemma, potentially.
So, from a purely legal standpoint, this might still resemble a classic prisoner's dilemma with betrayal as the seemingly dominant strategy.
Correct.
But when we factor in the powerful emotional and psychological dimensions, the deep love and trust they supposedly shared the game can be fundamentally transformed.
It can, yeah. Shared goals and unwavering trust can push them towards what's known as a coordination game, where mutual loyalty, staying silent, becomes the clearly optimal outcome for both individuals. They both want the 0, 0 outcome most.
But Dan, there's always a but.
As you pointed out, any flicker of doubt or any imbalance in their commitment throws it right back into the familiar, painful territory of the prisoner's dilemma. And the enduring legend of Bonnie and Clyde, in its idealization of their unwavering loyalty, offers us one compelling vision of how this dilemma could be overcome.
Right, the romantic version.
However, the often harsh realities of such high-stakes situations, where perfect trust is so difficult to guarantee, frequently lead to the classic, more cynical outcome of betrayal. It's that eternally poignant conflict between the deep yearning for connection and the primal drive for individual freedom.
So, as we bring this deep dive to a close, it seems that even a seemingly unbreakable bond like the one between Bonnie and Clyde was constantly facing that fundamental tension at the heart of the prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
The persistent push and pull between cooperating with your partner and acting solely in your own self-interest.
And as we've explored through these different scenarios, from the interrogation room to the division of stolen goods to the ultimate test of love, that individual self-interest, while often appearing to be the most rational path in the short term, frequently leads to outcomes that are collectively worse for everyone involved. Whether it's more years in prison or a smaller share of the loot, mutual betrayal rarely leads to the best overall result.
But the crucial insight, particularly evident in that final scenario, is the power of trust and deeply shared values.
Absolutely key.
When individuals genuinely prioritize the well-being of their partner and the strength of their relationship, the incentives can fundamentally shift, making cooperation and unwavering loyalty the truly rational and most desirable path forward.
And that leads us to a final thought for you, our listener. In your own life, can you identify situations that have played out like a prisoner's dilemma? Maybe not with prison time, but
Yeah, the stakes could be different.
what were the key factors that ultimately influenced the choices that were made? Consider the often delicate balance between pursuing your own immediate gains and recognizing the long-term value of trust and cooperation in the important relationships in your life, both personally and professionally.